and welcome to this special event this afternoon here at Harvard University. Thank you for making the time to be here with us. My name is Danilo Petranovic, and I work at the Abigail Adams Institute, an independent scholarly institute located here in Cambridge, dedicated to promoting humanistic learning at Harvard. We have some of our material there that you may want to check out. Before I say anything else about our panel, I would like to begin by thanking our friends and co-sponsors who have made today's event possible. First, I'd like to acknowledge Professor Tyler Vanderbilt and Harvard's Human Flourishing Program, which enabled us to be here in Harvard's government department, or Center for Government and International Studies, I believe is the full name, this building. And I believe, Tyler, you had your offices here at one point, many years ago. So this is where it began, like 8, 9 years ago, something like that. Our other co-sponsor, of course, is IECO, which stands for Institute for Ethics in Communications and Organizations, represented today by Rita Hakomi, Professor Guillén's closest associate. I hope I didn't butcher the name, Rita. I practiced it. Thank you. And finally, I would like to thank our capable staff at the Abigail Adams Institute who are recording this event with the help of Luis as well from IECO. So thank you. We'll be recording the whole thing this afternoon. So we'll go for just under 2 hours. Professor Manuel Guillén spent almost 10 years living and working here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, traveling back and forth between Valencia, Spain, and Boston. Among many other posts, he was a senior fellow with us at the Abigail Adams Institute, where he, over the years, presented several papers and commented on many more. Professor Guillén's professional expertise was in business and management, and his real expertise was in helping people by taking a genuine interest in them. I and my family and many of our students and colleagues all were beneficiaries of Manuel's attention, interest, and care. Today's panel is tasked with unpacking the main arguments of his last book, which there's the English edition and Spanish edition that we have displayed here, titled Motivations in Organizations. Ideally, we will assist you in illuminating some aspect of your own approach to work, your company, and society at large. So we have assembled a first-rate cast of contributors and sometime collaborators of Professor Guillén in order to do that. Kicking us off will be Professor Donna Hicks on my immediate left, associate at the Weatherhead Center of International Affairs here at Harvard. And she also has an office in this building as well, and was just reminded. So she's also an author of at least 2 excellent books on human dignity, and I know Professor Guillén talked about them a lot. I think, Donna, you were on every one of IECO's panels over the last 9 years. That's true. So
I should get an award reading.
Yes, probably. Thereafter, we'll hear from Dr. Kevin Majors, cognitive behavioral psychiatrist and founder of the platform Optimal Work, which I encourage you to check out. After that will be Professor Vanderbilt, professor of epidemiology at the Harvard School of Public Health, and as I mentioned earlier, director of the Human Flourishing Program, our partners. Then we will have Professor Michael Pearson at the Fordham University Business School, and then joining us over Zoom, Professor William English at the Georgetown University Business School, and co-author with Professor Guillén an important paper about the logic of gift, about which we will no doubt hear shortly. And then Rita Hakomi will go last. Rita met Manolo 12 years ago when she began her PhD in Valencia, Spain. After completing her dissertation, she worked closely with Manolo in promoting truly human leadership in organizations. She is currently the director of IECO and the executive director of the IECO Business Ethics Chair at the University of Valencia, both institutions founded by Manuel Guillén. Okay, last thing I'll say. Each panelist will speak for about 10 minutes, some a little more, others a little less, as we prearranged. And after that, we'll have a conversation that will include members of the live audience. I will keep time, and my goal will be to conclude today's event a few minutes before 6 o'clock this evening. You are all then welcome to join us for a small reception at the Abigail Adams Institute. Thank you again for joining us, and Donna, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danilo. I wanted to start by telling you a story about the first time I met Manuel, or Manolo. It was at RCC, and I think this was it had to be at least 10 years ago. You weren't there yet, Danielle. And I was giving a talk with Bob Selman. Some of you might know him from the ed school, and I don't even remember why I was invited, but I gave a talk about dignity, one of my books. And after the panel was finished, we all went into, that little room there where we have coffee and goodies and all of that. And I'm pouring myself some coffee, and I turn around, and I see this bright light walking toward me. He was like, and I thought, whoa. It was, he was like a beam of bright light. He was unbelievable. I mean, the smile. Oh, where's the smile? That's Bill. Sorry, Bill.
You smiling?
Yeah, Bill's smiling. Okay. But you all know that smile. All of us know that smile. And he came rushing up to me and said, "Oh my God, I cannot believe that you are doing this dignity work." He said, "It's an answer to a big question that I had about motivations." And he was just so excited. He was like, oh. And I thought, okay, this is great. Yeah, wonderful. And he said, we have to collaborate. We have to collaborate because this is the missing piece in my analysis of how people are motivated. And so I said, great. And then that was the first time we had met. And then I don't know, I guess he must have been there at RCC more than just for that talk, but and then we met at Henrietta's table all the time, and we tried to figure out how to integrate the dignity work. And so it was just one of those joyful moments that just kept going with him. You never got tired of seeing that bright light. And I know he's here with us today. I know he is. I invited him. I said, please, I need your help. And he always answers, He always says, sure, I'll be there to help you. So I just wanted to share that because honestly, that light is so bright and it's never going to be extinguished. He brings it to us here today. We're all going to be focusing on him today. And he, in terms of my task here, by the way, I'm not management. My specialty is international conflict resolution, so I've got notes here, and I don't know all of the ins and outs of the theory, but he did write this wonderful book about motivations, and in the first chapter, I'm supposed to talk about the first and second chapter. In the first chapter, he said, look, these theories of motivation, he felt really needed an update, because he didn't think that the theories actually spoke to all of the deeper levels of reasons why people do what they do, why they're motivated to do what they do. And so he starts out by talking about the distinction between extrinsic and intrinsic motivations. Extrinsic motivations, the motivations that come from the outside, you get your degrees, you get all of the external complexities around why you might choose to take one path over the other. But then he also talked about the internal, and this guy's name was Frederick Herzberg, who came up with this original theory of intrinsic, extrinsic motivation. But then he talked about Maslow's theory of needs, and which I was a lot more familiar with. But Maslow, as you probably all know, he talked about some basic physiological needs that we all have as human that motivate us to do things, which are, food, shelter, and all of the physical characteristics of making a human. And then he goes all the way up to what he called self-actualization needs, where the people are motivated to do things based on their desire to develop and to learn and to grow. So now, Manolo said in his first chapter, he said, well, if these two theories are correct, one was the extrinsic, intrinsic, and then Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where they had the physiological needs at the core, and then higher aspirational needs of the self-development at the top, self-actualization, then they should be compatible. He said they should be compatible. So he integrated the two, the outer and the inner, the extrinsic and the intrinsic, as well as a look at the inner and outer. No, is that right? No, not inner and outer, but what?
Intrinsic.
No, the lower needs and the higher needs.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. Yeah. So he created this matrix with all of these levels of needs combining, and he said, "Oh, this is just great. This is great." And here's what the way he tested these theories of his. He asked his students. He would say, "Okay, give me an example of why you would take this course." And leave it to Manolo, right? To want to engage them in a way that was meaningful to them. Not he presenting all of these grand theories as a professor, but he, in the beginning, wanted to engage his students and make them feel like a part of the. That is so Manolo. And so he was asking all his students all these questions, and he got them, using this matrix that he got them to reflect on their own reasons why they do things. And he really felt that it could be a great tool for self-reflection and even growth in new learning. But then he asked, wait a minute, is there anything that's missing here in these motivations, the extrinsic and intrinsic focus? He said, I think there's something missing. And so the second chapter opens when he's talking about how he always goes into elevators and listens to the conversations that people are having in the elevator, and he's wondering, how would we classify the concern about the way the boss is treating them? How would we classify somebody not doing the right thing or treating you fairly? So he was concerned about, there's a moral dimension here in these motivations. People want to be treated well. People want to be experience their professors especially as doing the right thing on their students' behalf. And so he started thinking about this moral dimension, and he said this was the missing piece. This is what's missing here. And so I love that. I just love that elevator, like he's eavesdropping on everybody's conversation. And so then he realized, okay, we've got to introduce this moral dimension, and he brings in Aristotle. This is our Manolo. This is what he does. He brings in Aristotle, and he says, we are really motivated, we humans, to experience and to attain the good. And Aristotle talked about 3 different kinds of goods. Of course, I don't remember them now, but
useful.
Yeah, thank you very much. And he said, basically, we want this because we want a good life. We want to flourish. We want to evolve and develop into the best human beings that we can. And this is really important to us, that we be in relationship in a way where we are being treated like we are, we're decent, we're special human beings. And this is where my work comes in, because the focus that I've made on dignity is all about the way people want to be treated. And he talked about this as an extrinsic motivation, that people want to be treated as if they matter. People want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be listened to, cared for, like you were saying about Manolo. He's so good at it. And he thought that we all really, that part of a universal human desire was to be engaged with people in a way that really develops the moral good and that enhances the moral good. He says we share a universal desire to receive the moral good. We all want that, to be treated that way. And of course, when we're not and these are all the elevator conversations about ways in which the bosses or the managers weren't treating them well. He says that the first thing to go in a relationship with your boss when you're not being treated well is trust. And when trust breaks down, that's when all hell breaks loose. That is like the worst, because in order to regain and reignite that relationship of trust, he thinks it takes, recognition, rectification, and reparation. And the problem with breaking trust is that people want to feel like they can be vulnerable with their bosses and their managers, but when they can't, when vulnerability becomes a liability for people, he said this is the worst thing that can happen when trust breaks down. We cannot feel vulnerable. We can't be our authentic selves for whatever reason. And so this desire to receive the moral good, as Manolo puts it, it dovetailed beautifully with the dignity work. And one of the things that I did, which he was so excited about, was I operationalized dignity. So what does it look like? How do you treat people if you want to treat them with dignity? And in my research, I found that people want their identity accepted, no matter who they are, their race, religion, ethnicity, etc. They want to be recognized for the good work that they've done. They want recognition for the contributions that they've made to the workplace. They want to be understood. They don't want people to rush to judgment about who they are. They want safety, which is a huge one. People want to feel safe in the environment. And again, when trust breaks down, that's when safety also is challenged as well. And what else? Let's see, recognition, belonging. People want that sense of belonging. And so all these things are what leaders need to be thinking about when, come in. There are a few others too. That people want to be given the benefit of the doubt. They want to be thought of as having integrity. And people want an apology. They want an apology when something bad happens and let's say somebody mistreats them. People want to hear, I'm sorry. But it's not just, I'm sorry. It's also, I'm going to work really hard at not doing that again. Because you can apologize 100 times and then nothing changes. Fairness is another one. Autonomy, people don't like to be micromanaged. So I think at the end, Manolo, at the end of the second chapter, he came to the conclusion that, yes, this extrinsic desire for the moral good, to be treated with dignity, is really a powerful addition to these theories of motivation. But then, of course, what does he do? He closes the chapter by saying, well, yes, we all want to receive the moral good. We want to be treated well. But what about an intrinsic moral good, developing our own inner moral good, where we're not just receiving it, but we're also giving it, and we're embodying it. So that's the end of my my thing. But I want to say, I'm excited to hear what he's going to say. Kevin, do you have the next? Okay. Okay, I know what it is.
Yeah. Thank you so much, John. I'll just be following up on that. I'm covering chapters, strangely, 3 and 9. Okay, so, but I think it'll fit. So the last time that Manolo came to town, I picked him up at the airport, and every time I pick him up, it would be a geyser of stories of people he talked to on the plane. It was like the people that we waited for the bag, and then he presented to them the Matrix. He always called it with me the Matrix. In the book, it's the map of motivations. But in common parlance with Manolo, it was just the Matrix. And he was a man on a mission to present this idea that there is a kind of dynamism potentially found in our work. And if we can discover that, it will just take us further and further along the road of real development. And so in the book we're discussing today, Manuel's voice is just unmistakable. Rereading it is moving. You know, that it's the same sense of enthusiasm. And you also hear how Manuel would deal with skeptics. When he met a person who was skeptical, he treated it like a treasure. He was very respectful when people disagreed with him, and he took it seriously. And he actually grew as a result of that. And his theories grew as a result of that. He and you see this in the book. For instance, the opening paragraphs of chapter 9. He has this conversation in Valencia with a law student. And after hearing about the map of motivations, this law student stood up and said, "This is way too idealistic." And he said that it's that trying to achieve a meaningful work-life balance was a colossal and unattainable goal. And it's hard enough to find a job. To find the ideal job, which is not what Manuel was talking about, but to find an ideal job, well, that's impossible. And in a way, you can see how that impacted Manuel, that he keeps coming back to it and trying to see, like, what was it that he was missing so he could communicate with this kind of skeptic. And he got this great key in this 2019 conference that Manuel organized at AAI, and Michael Steger was there. And he was talking about the idea that you could have a job, a career, or a calling. And something clicked with Manuel. He finally said, I am not being too idealistic. There is a pathway here, and that's what he's trying to help everyone to see. There's a pathway. And so he saw that this roadmap, or this matrix, was anchored in realism. He rejected the idea that some people are stuck in meaningless jobs. While admitting that there could be jobs with really objective difficulties, he believed that any ethical job was open to this higher purpose, that you could find a pathway higher within it. So in chapter 8, he presents the idea of the compass, of how you progress from a job to career to calling. But chapter 9 is this really the inner dynamism at work. And the dynamism, basically the process is this. When we commit to working at our best, we unleash this process of growth. And every one of us, in some way, can be more committed to working at our best. And you quote this Castilian poet who said that doing things well is more important than doing them. So if we seek to do our job well, that job will become a career and calling. There's this inner pathway. And he called this unfolding process the logic of love. By logic, he means this positive attitude that then gives rise to love and all its consequences. And that's contrasted with the logic of fear, which is a negative attitude that gives rise to fear and its consequences. And then he loved this idea of logic. I mean, Thomas Fabier-Puch, he also is one to talk about this, but he and Manuel were up one line. This idea that there's an unfolding process, and that's what he called it. That's why he called it logic. As if by logical, there's just like one axiom follows another in this logical progression. And that is the essence of the logic of love. So if a person is in a job that they find meaningless, Manuel would say their first task then is to find the good that is in that job. And that's realism, not idealism. And one can always come to love one's work, and because you can appreciate the good that it contains. And love is a response to the good. And so if you focus on that good, this pathway emerges. So love for one's job means appreciate the good that it has, even with its limitations. I'll just read this passage. It's true that in many cases, the job we have does not match our deepest personal desires or abilities. What I want to underline here is that having a job is something good in itself. Being optimistic, having a positive attitude towards the job, is something you can freely decide upon, even in the worst possible scenario. This awareness of the good means having a job can be a source of a certain peace, courage, and joy for any employed person, because it provides some basic material goods, even if it's not the ideal job. So that striving to do that job well to the best of our ability opens up this new path. To paraphrase then the first practical tip in chapter 3, stop and reflect on how well you work. Look at your workmanship and see if you can find within yourself the desire to work better. So that is the key to how to approach a job. Just ask yourself, how can my workmanship improve? What would it look like to do this job better? And we start to find then new ways that our job can stretch us. We start to find new adventures in our job, however humble they may be. And the more humble the adventures are, the more frequently we can find them, and so all the better. So he draws this connection between the ability to discover these adventures and having a spirit of humility. That humility is what allows us to recognize our strengths and weaknesses and that of our job. He says it may sound bizarre, but humility is a key quality that makes growth possible. So any person who strives to work their best in the job is already going beyond what it takes to earn just a paycheck. They're transcending the logic of exchange and duty. Trying to work well in your job starts to actually place you on this journey of advancement and achievement. And that's precisely how work is viewed when you see it as a career. So when we think of what's needed to advance in our career, then we think of skills or sets of skills that are required. And those are the skills that make us adept at accomplishing particular goals in our life. Then Manuel anchors this in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as Dominic mentioned. So when people are just focused on receiving a paycheck, when work is viewed only as a job, they're addressing the lowest levels in Maslow's hierarchy, food and shelter. And that, undoubtedly, that's really important. But one does need to look beyond that. Because if you're always just thinking about the paycheck, you're living in threat mode, right? You're living in the logic of fear. The answer is not to be ever more secure. The answer is to be advancing, to be progressing, so that one's motivations are always aiming higher. And so he talks about how when we start building our skills, well then we satisfy these higher level needs for affiliation and achievement. But then, he talks about work as being work well done is the key to psychological growth. And then it sets the stage to work having an even higher purpose, that we can start to move beyond skills. Move beyond the skills we're developing to how we are developing as a person. And then we move from psychological growth to a moral or spiritual growth. So he has another practical tip, which is the key transition from work as a career to work as a calling. Keep asking yourself whether your work is helping you attain a higher purpose in your life. The career mindset is great for helping us to take work seriously. But its limitation is that it's more focused on career advancement than personal advancement. And the solution is how to discover how your work can bring out your best. So when you go home at night, does the way you work during the day help you to give your best to those that you're closest to? The way we work, Manuel says, is the way we live. And so we want to find deeper meaning in our work. We have to see, is our work contributing to our growth in ideals? And by ideals, he means virtues that you are deliberately aiming to attain. So an ideal is a virtue that you aspire to. It's not necessarily the habit you have, that's the virtue. It's what you're aspiring to. It's the kind of growth goal that you're setting for yourself. And what makes it an ideal is that it's inexhaustible. So when you seek to grow in ideals, you move beyond the categories of the useful and the pleasant to the moral. According to Aristotle, which of course we mentioned, he loves quoting Aristotle, the prime moment of moral growth is right before you begin a task. You pause and just ask yourself, what kind of noble quality or can I aim to practice in what I'm about to do? You need an image of the koan, the beautiful and noble, before you start something. And that's what ideals give us.
So in chapter 3, Manuel discusses how Aristotle and Maslow fit together. And he recounts with his customary modesty that he had underestimated Maslow. and because he didn't think that Maslow's self-actualizers were actually not fulfilled. He thought, well, this is just like a psychological thing, but it's not really character. And it was, in fact, a student of his who in class said, haven't you read The Farther Reaches of Human Nature? This posthumous work of Maslow? And Manuel hadn't. So he admitted that, so he went and read it. And he was delighted to discover that, in fact, Maslow's self-actualizers were the same as the virtuous person that Aristotle discussed. They're aware of their limitations, they're not arrogant, they have sincere willingness to learn from others, they can resist popular opinion, they're the best that the human species could. So when we see excellence according to ideals, then we begin to see a new value to the challenges that we face. When things are difficult for us, ironically, we actually have the best ability to grow. He says, ironically, challenges are the path to a richer and more satisfying life. Happiness comes from living out our ideals to the fullest, and challenges are the way to do it. In fact, because work is a hinge on which life turns, the growth that we attain while working applies not just to work, but to every area of our lives. When we see challenges as opportunities, the workplace becomes the natural situation for personal growth. But just when you think you reach the peak with Manuel, he says, wait, there's more. There's always another level. And this is the same idea. Because the highest ideal is love. Love is the logic that drives the growth in all ideas. Doing things for love in the professional world means service. And through this service, we actually build true bonds with those around us. So the question we can ask ourselves before starting any task, to go from a calling to something higher, is what bonds with others can I develop by giving my best to those tasks? When we aim to build bonds, our work becomes transcendent, because we transcend ourselves. The highest ideal is love, and love is the bond between ourselves and others, and with the other. And that's how we can all come to experience work and the higher quality. It has the quality of a summoning that we receive to transcend ourselves, to give ourselves in the service of others. And those of us who do know, you look as a man who always put people ahead of projects. He was the happiest when he was helping others and developing bonds with them. So just I'll close saying, the practical questions in chapter 3 are my favorite parts of the thought. They tie together everything. It's not only because that's where he mentions me and ultimate thing, but I encourage you to send up but it's because here he asks the questions that can help anyone progress from having a job to having a career to finding your true calling. And I'll just repeat them. First, stop and reflect on how well you work. Look at your workmanship and see if you can find within yourself the desire to work better. Second, keep asking yourself whether your work is helping you attain a higher purpose in your life. And third, what bonds with others can I develop by giving my best in this task? Skills, ideals, bonds. That is the path to growth. First. Does he say anything?
Right on time, both of you. 15 minutes each.
I'd like to thank Danilo and Gabrielle Adams Institute for hosting this event in memory of Danilo, and for my fellow panelists as well for the opportunity to discuss what I think truly is remarkable work, this motivation in organizations. Manolo was a remarkable person, and I still remember when I first heard of his passing away. I'd been in contact with him, had sent him messages, hoping, praying for recovery, but when he did finally pass away, feeling that our world has lost someone who truly is remarkable, whose contributions have been tremendous and affected the lives of so many others. Manolo was generous. He was remarkably thoughtful. He was joyful. He was spiritual. He was giving. He was loving in many ways, and I think he manifested many of the values and ideas put forward in this book. And I think this book is therefore itself a powerful testimony to his life, to his contribution. And as I was returning to this material yesterday and preparing for
these remarks, that gift, that contribution, came back to me. I was encouraged. I was brought to reflect upon my own life. I personally benefited yet again from going through his ideas and his work in a time where I am facing quite a number of challenges with regard to career and management and leadership. Coming back to these questions, coming back to those fundamental motivations was a tremendous encouragement for me, and felt it set me back on the right track. Yet again, to be giving, to be loving, to seek those higher goods and contribute those to others, and to ground one's decisions in day-to-day work in these ideas and these ideals. So I was asked to comment on chapters 4 and 5. 4 was transcendent motivations, 5 spiritual motivations. So I'll offer some brief remarks in summary of each of those. I'll pose some questions that I have been left with going through this material again, and then offer a few final reflections. Chapter 4 is on transcendent motivations. This is sort of the second move Manolo makes beyond that 2x2 matrix. As Donna had indicated, initially he starts with extrinsic and intrinsic motivations, and what he then calls lower and higher order goods or motives or ends. And the first move he makes to expand this, which Donna and Kevin remarked on, was to expand the notion of the goods to not just the lower and higher, but also to the moral, which he then, as was discussed, reframes as, in Aristotle's terms, the useful, the pleasant, the moral. The second move he makes to expand the matrix is to introduce the notion of transcendent motivations. While the extrinsic motivations were sort of receiving the good, and the intrinsic motivations were achieving the good, he argues that if we're really going to understand human motivations properly, we need to acknowledge what he calls transcendent motivations, giving the good to others. He argues that we are not inherently just selfish. It's not just about receiving and achieving, but if you simply ask people why they are acting as they do, often it is to give. It is to give some good thing to others. So he makes the case that we are not purely selfish, and I'll come back to that momentarily, but that we do give others useful, pleasant, moral, and eventually he also discusses spiritual goods. And as I was going through this material and his description of giving these useful, pleasant, moral goods, I was sort of led to reflect on the nature of parenting, for example, and how much of parenting is providing both the useful goods, but then also the pleasant goods, the meeting the psychological needs, and allowing development, but then also the moral goods and the spiritual goods as well, trying to shape and form one's children. And so it made, I think, good sense in the context of parenting. But what's remarkable about Manolo's work is he takes it from those intimate relationships to management. And he says the same dynamics really should be at play in management. And every chapter is filled not just with wonderful ideas, but also advice, practical tips, probing questions. And so I just want to read through some of the practical tips in chapter 4 on transcendent motivations, and to think about these questions. First, I'll go through the practical tips and then some of the questions that he poses, but in the context of management, in the context of leadership. So first, he discusses how that we need to balance the extrinsic and the intrinsic motivations. But then he says, when that transcendent motivation, that motivation to give, to transcend the self, to give to others, when that transcendent motivation prevails in us, it becomes a habit, and then we start seeing potential for human growth in everyone we meet. The more we put the transcendent motivation into practice, the more we'll see its benefits, and the higher it will become at our set of motivations. People who engage in the habit of being generous end up achieving top positions in society. When someone's joy is in helping others, the natural consequence will be to activate lots of relationships. transcendent motivation makes everyone better off, including ourselves, by making the group better as a whole. The more we are driven by motivation of giving, the less we lose in the process. The more we give, the more we want to keep giving. And therefore, the higher the transcendent motivations become. One can simply imagine what a world would look like where management and leadership embodied these principles, embodied these practical tips that Manolo is passing along. And so he asks us to reflect on our own lives, both in the context of our relationship, but also in the context of leadership and management. How often do I try to serve and do my best to help others, to help in solving their problems? How often do I make people around me feel good? How often do I try to leave people around me feeling better than when I found them? How often do I genuinely care for others' well-being? Again, I think he's bringing these ideas into the context not just of relationships, but leadership and management as well. So it was a beautiful, powerful chapter. Chapter 5 then moves on to expand the matrix yet further, and it does so by introducing spiritual good. So we've got the useful, the pleasant, the moral, and then he also argues we need a fourth level. We need to think about spiritual good, which he essentially defines as those goods extending beyond rationality, or those that in one way or another require faith. He comments on how in Maslow's later work, he acknowledges the existence of these goods, which he refers to as values of the spirit, or being values, or be values, but which Manolo refers to as these spiritual goods, resulting in spiritual motivations. While he says not all will acknowledge the existence of the goods themselves, everyone should acknowledge the existence of these motivations, that many throughout the world pursue these spiritual goods. It motivates action. And that if you ask people why they act, in many cases, it is to pursue something related to their faith, something related to their spirituality, something related to their religion. And if we are going to think about human behavior holistically, we need to acknowledge these motivations. And so this is not just a matter of do you embrace a faith perspective or not. No, this is an acknowledgement that even if you don't, others do. And that these are powerful motivations in people's lives. These need to be taken into account and are thinking about other people and in our management as well. So he acknowledges the complexity, talks about 3 different levels of spirituality, the sort of non-religious spirituality that he still says this is real, often a kind of ultimate sense of connection or ultimate sense of meaning and purpose, not just any meaning and purpose, but what really is most important. But then he says there's also kind of broad religious and spiritual goods or spiritualities related to notions of the origin of life, of the existence of God, of what happens after death. And then there's what he calls narrower religious perspectives, which really turn to the question of the existence of a personal God. And this becomes important in his later chapters in development as he expands the matrix yet further. But he says all 3 of these levels really constitute genuine spiritual motivations for people, and that there is an extrinsic, an intrinsic, and a transcendent set of spiritual motivations. We seek to receive spiritual goods, we seek to achieve spiritual goods, and we often seek to transmit or contribute spiritual goods to others. And all of this is important in understanding the fabric of our life and of our actions and motivations. And then some very interesting material at the end of the chapter on sort of the intrinsic spiritual motivations. How do we achieve these spiritual goods? And are we really taking time to do so? Are we putting in the necessary effort to attain them? Are we spending sufficient time in reflection, in contemplation for those who are religious, in prayer? That we have a role in bringing these about, and that much of our life and society today in the hectic pace prevents us from doing so. So he concludes the chapter with a call back to acknowledging these spiritual goods, but also doing what we can to pursue them. I thought both chapters really contributed a great deal, helpful in my own thinking. Also, some of them left me with questions, some of which are addressed in later chapters as well. But one of them was sort of the relation between frameworks. In some ways, the whole birth of the book was trying to bring frameworks together, the extrinsic and intrinsic motivations with higher and lower order goods. But as I thought about his hierarchies here and its relation to my own discipline of public health, and I was left wondering, what is the relation of this to, say, the World Health Organization's definition of health, which is health is a state of complete physical, mental, and spiritual and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Over the years, many have proposed adding a spiritual dimension to this, what we've sometimes referred to as the WHO plus definition of health, the complete state of physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. And that then begins to look very much like Manolo's ordering of the goods as well. But one's left with the relation between what he calls the moral goods and what the WHO framework would call the social goods. And in many ways, our questions of morality are intimately connected to our relations with others, our sociality. Yet that social dimension sort of extends beyond simply questions of morality to relationships, to coming to know others. And in some ways, as I was reflecting on this, I thought Manolo's motivations, the extrinsic, intrinsic, transcendent, and eventually religious, are capturing those relational dimensions, relation to oneself, relation to others, relation to God. But in any case, I found it an interesting question to try to relate these frameworks together. Manolo makes a case in chapter 4 that we are not selfish, that these transcendent motivations that transcend the self, that give to others, are real, are genuine, are important. And I do very much agree, but I think it's also the case that the nature of who we are as human people are such that we ourselves find fulfillment when we give. And so perhaps there is no truly, purely altruistic act, unselfish act, because we benefit when we give. And that's simply the nature of who we are as human persons, as human society. And again, I think he, in later chapters, touches upon and explores some of these ideas. At the religious level, then, also, he talks about these spiritual motivations, and the extrinsic spiritual motivation is receiving the spiritual good, and he refers to eternal life as an instance of this. But just as I think it is the nature of the human person to give, and we receive when we give, I think in many Christian understandings of spiritual good, it is by loving God that, in fact, we receive. So that some of these motivations, in fact, come together in the context of love, in the context of religious life. Just a few final remarks in this last minute on Manolo himself. As I said before, he was a remarkable person, a remarkable thinker, a remarkable friend, but I think also a remarkable educator. The fact that he was able to bring these ideas to so many students, to education itself, truly is an extraordinary contribution. And that contribution to the lives of others was certainly an intrinsic motivation for him, something that filled him with joy, with happiness, but a transcendent one as well. He wanted continually to give the useful, pleasant, moral, and spiritual goods to others. I do very much think this book continues that contribution to the lives of others, but I also think we have a responsibility to continue on in Manolo's footsteps to accomplish these goods. I think he's left us with a responsibility to convey these ideas to others as well. So once again, very grateful for Bill and the Abigail Adams Institute for allowing us to do so here at this session.
Thank you. Yeah, It's a pleasure to be here, to honor Manolo and to speak with such a distinguished panel as well, to talk about these ideas. And I'll start with my personal connection with Manolo, which honestly I don't really remember because it all started online too. And those were not the most remarkable moments, but much as Donna, as you said, what I remember and left with, always thinking about him, is that beam of light, is that quality of energy and vibration that he brought to each room where it just lit up and people felt more alive. And I think that's maybe the essence of motivation, is being alive, right? And we met at some point, I think in the context of Harvard, one of the panels here at the RCC, and he had known about my work on humanistic management. And the terms that he was using, and I will be talking about chapter 6 and chapter 8, those are not terms that you speak about in that discipline, right? Much less write a book about. And it seemed to me when he was talking about this work on motivation, in some way might drew on ourselves, like everything has already been said, it's like, it's so boring, it's so chewed out, there's really not much. There's not much more to say. In fact, I mean, that we teach it all the time, the same thing, and there's really not much more there. What we are really, really failing at is getting people to understand their access to motivation. And we have these beautiful theories, et cetera, but then the students, and I think for me as a practitioner also in the field, you see this pandemic of disengagement. People are not accessing their motivation. They're not aware. They're not paying attention. They have very little access to an intention. But when you saw and met Manolo, you're like, wow, we're reminded of what's possible in terms of what we could access, what we could be doing. I think he was also very anxious. He was very driven to give something back. And chapter 6 is talking about these religious motivations, and not just giving back, but returning. And returning the love. And I think many of us academics study things, or we're told to study things that we lack. So people told me that at one point, so why do you study trust? Why do you study dignity? Why do you study that? I felt pretty offended that somebody would say it's like something I lack. But then looking at this, yeah, I feel I'm lacking that truly. Yeah, there is something missing in the world around me. And I don't know if Manolo came from that deficiency perspective. I think he came from an abundance perspective. He had a lot of motivation. He had a lot of that spirit. And I think he was looking for something to explain it better, and he didn't find it. He was extremely frustrated. One thing that I'm just sort of connecting, and when I reread the chapter, was also this returning to the love of God. And it's like, I remember him in the last month sort of saying and sharing that he's ready. He's like happy. He was even joyous in that moment. Remember, Rita, when you were sharing that, I was like, wow, this is just another quality that I don't claim to have access to really in a reflective manner. And so I just wanted to share that about Manolo, who wrote the book as almost a manifesto, I think, of him as a person, as you also mentioned. It's like, this is sort of maybe his return and his gift to the world, that I felt almost like he manifested his highest motivation in writing this book and giving it as a gift for us to be received, so he could be received in return. And in some way, I'm reminded of this notion of Teilhard de Chardin, of the noosphere. Some of you are familiar with that, where it's like, it's actually progress. We're not digressing, we're progressing towards. And this is this whole matrix of the development towards the omega point, right? Towards something higher, something more elevated. And that we're all returning to that. It's a return. And he uses that phrase, which I think I've rarely heard before, and specifically in the context of what we teach our business students and business schools. It's a whole range of vocabulary that I think we can draw on as we go along for a long time, because so much paucity of thinking and language and conversation that's been missing. And so I'm just sharing a couple of words just to showcase in terms of what we teach our business students and business schools. It's a whole range of vocabulary that I think we can draw on as we go along for a long time, because so much paucity of thinking and language and conversation that's been missing. And so I'm just sharing a couple of words just to showcase in terms of what Manolo talks about in chapter 6, but also in chapter 8, that are concepts that really truly maybe embody the power of what I would call a humanistic education, or what Abigail Evans is sort of promoting also, that really that universality, the universitas of knowledge and experience, that he uses glory, he uses sanctity, he uses conversion, gift, sacrifice, giving, contemplation, returning, and then love. And I just come back from an experience where we had some of the business leaders in the room, and they slowly started to adjust to the terminology of love. But it was very uncomfortable for many. And they were saying, we cannot use that word in Latin America. We cannot use that word because it's pink, it's Valentine's Day, it's all commercial. And you sort of see how you need to unpack a number of these terms when you specifically being an educator like Manolo was for students that were very much in a commercial mindset in many ways. I'm not going to start talking about sacrifice or glory or conversion, because those are terminologies that are really still very much in the religious domain, and maybe even there they're not really unpacked or represented in an accessible way. But I leave that to the side. But I just want to mention the virtue that Manolo represented by writing about these terms and putting them in the context of motivations. And I just picked up here, society can only be happy and free in proportion as it is virtuous, from Mary Wollstonecraft that you put out there. And it just reminded me, Manolo was that kind of virtuous person, and what I admire in terms of the virtue that he displayed by writing chapter 6 specifically is courage. And I think in parts of the chapters before, he's introduced, or he writes how he's introduced to other people to be talking about spirituality and religion in an unashamed way. And he was sanctified by that, I think. That was him. He was in every conversation, he took that on himself with such joy and glee and respect, which I think most people were always a bit startled by and like questioning. And he writes about some of the interactions that he has had with people from an atheistic community that called itself humanist that you have present here at Harvard too. But he was not somebody who would refrain from that conversation. He would engage people at this deeper level with such dignity, love, and glorified them in the process of it, where it's like, wow, they took on their own conversion, and he writes about that, right? And I think you can see these motivations in that space of chapter 6, like that religious motivation, that was what he lived. That was what he lived out. And it is difficult to put names onto that experience when you have the exchange with him without that book, right? And I do think what he offers in the context of, I think, life in general is that language and the return to language and a new way of telling stories with courage, and that people that maybe are not so familiar with that language embrace it, access it, and use it. What I want to share is my hesitance still using this kind of language and the matrix or the map with students. I'm at a Jesuit institution like Bill is, and you would think that many students come there with some kind of background of a spiritual journey and some kind of grasp and maybe religious motivation. But even when you talk to them about calling and transcendence, it's not something that they touch. It is something that turns them off, because they're bifurcated in many ways. Now, we'll take it upon ourselves to be courageous, to bring these concepts into the context of a conversation so that they can make sense of them. Because I think that's what we owe to Manolo in the book, and I think humanity that is currently in this impoverished state. And he uses this map, which I think that's maybe my final reflection on it, or maybe a part for the conversation, is like, is it a map? Is it an accurate sort of depiction? I think probably yes. Is it something that has a direction in it? Like there's a north, there's a better, there's a worse? I just wonder, where do people start? Guides you with the more earthly, worldly kind of conditions that you need to fulfill. maybe there's a different way than progressing, but really returning, as you say, returning and making that circle, making that loop go. So with that, I'll just say thank you to Manolo again for just being here now with us. I also dare say that in some way publicly, which I would probably not have said in prior iterations of myself. But I do think that he gives that space to that circular approach to life and motivation that maybe can benefit us all. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'm just going to interject and just to say that Bill English is joining us via Zoom, as we said, so I'm going to turn it over to him before we then let Rita conclude this first portion of the afternoon. Thanks.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Danilo, for convening this, and the Abigail Adams Institute for hosting it. I should apologize for not being there in person. I wish I were, although Manolo is perhaps partially responsible for me not being there. I was reflecting on one of the last times we were in person together. We were at Burdick's in Harvard Square getting some hot chocolate. And, I was telling him about I married this great woman and, we were hoping to have a family soon. And in my notes, I literally used the word, his face lit up. He said, "I've been praying for you for this very thing." And he sort of described, his hopes for us and how that was already on his mind and something he had been praying for before we even, had that conversation. So perhaps Manolo's intercession has played a little role, but we are expecting another child in the next week or two here, so that's why I'm not down there in person. I also wanted to say a few more words about Manolo on a personal level before turning to this chapter. I don't remember my first meeting with him, but I remember my second very well. I think the first was probably at a social event where we established we had similar interests, so we scheduled a follow-up meeting. And he had come over to Kirkland's dining room. I remember it being a sort of sunny morning where we sat there, and there was so much energy. It was like, drinking from a fire hydrant. He had ideas, we were talking about our mutual interest and how he wanted to see that, developed here, and his idea for doing a project there, and people he wanted to put in touch with. And so it was like many people describe, this energy and dynamism that he expressed from, at the very beginning of our knowing each other. And I do recall, he asked at one point in that conversation, would you ever think of teaching in a business school? Of course, being an academic, I wouldn't be interested in teaching anywhere at that point in my career. A job is a job, and I knew about business schools as potentially a career path, but it was only in that conversation as we talked through some of these ideas that I sort of, for the first time, saw how my interests in ethics in particular could actually be linked up to various sorts of questions in business ethics and management, and that it made sort of sense that maybe a business school would be my home. So there's a way in which Manolo is also partially responsible for the job I have today as well. From there, very quickly, we started engaging in projects together. We had, the famous RCC IECO video series that, he was sort of the role of Oprah in, bringing all these people together, giving an audience, live studio audience, putting these panels together, figuring out the moderation and the questions, the choreography. He had a vision there from the time, he first conceived of it, and he executed it. And those videos are, seen around the world today. I think that's the way that I really got to know, Michael and Donna and Rita and Tomas and many others. And, what a tremendous success they were to go from that. It was entirely Manolo's, concept and vision that made that happen and had such a lasting impact. A year or two after that, we were co-authoring a paper together. This is a paper on the logic of gift, which I think to this day is my most cited business ethics paper. It came out in BEQ, and it has interesting resonances with the chapter I'm going to talk about, I was assigned to talk about here today. So this is chapter 7. This is a chapter on the logic of love. And he begins, as you might not be surprised to find out, given what Donna said earlier, it begins with him having a conversation with a stranger. He was coming to Boston, going through customs, and the customs agent says, or the immigration officer says, what are you doing here? He said, well, I'm writing a book. Oh, what's it about? So he has apparently a 10-minute conversation with the customs agent about the map of motivations, and reports back, favorably, that it all made sense to the customs agent. He says, yeah, it's so important to have a job you love, and he said, my job as a customs agent, it isn't the most important job in the world, it's not the highest paying job in the world, but it's exactly what I want. It's good hours, and I'm able to spend time with my family, and I get to meet interesting people. And he sort of talks through how he's satisfied through his work, and how his work also complements and makes sense of all these other aspects of his life. And so Manolo sort of ends that those first few pages saying, "Isn't it amazing that this person knew this all sort of intuitively? Do I still have something to say in this chapter? Is this something that is, so widely known?" And, I think one thing that comes out in the discussion of love in this chapter is that sort of from the phenomenology of it, it's something that is accessible to everybody. It's accessible to all human beings, and that, Manolo suggests, is precisely because it's essential to who we are as human beings. Love is sort of constitutive of human life, of its meaningfulness. Now the challenge is, as Michael alluded to, this isn't language that we're comfortable with, certainly management literature and academia at large, and in this chapter, Manolo sort of reviews reasons for that. He thinks through critiques of scientism, of reductionism, of analytic frameworks that can't make love intelligible. These are the dominant frameworks that we work with in a lot of academia, often for good reasons. It's useful sometimes to be reductive. It's useful, for various, narrow purposes. But the argument of the larger chapter is that love is in fact the key for a meaningful life, and a key for flourishing organizations. And we should try to understand how it works better. This chapter has what I would say is deeply Augustinian themes. So to review our Aquinas and Augustine, Aquinas has that in the Secunda Secundae says, is love the form of the virtue? Yes, it is. Okay, so love in Aquinas' terms means that sort of the ends for which we do things. He says love, all the virtues have ends, and those ends are somewhat united sort of in our ultimate loves. Augustine has a slightly different way of thinking about virtues and love, where you might say all virtues are forms of love. All virtues are ways of expressing love in different contexts and forms and excellencies. And, in this chapter, Manolo is sort of unpacking how love works in all these different ways. And I was reminded too of a sort of famous quip in The City of God, where Augustine is thinking about what we today would call sort of social ontology. What makes groups of people? And he advances this claim that communities are constituted by common objects of love. This is what makes a people. It's what binds us together. Common objects of love. And in this chapter, what Manolo is doing is, I think, working with this Augustinian theme to uncover all the ways that love works in relationships, in families, in friendships, but most importantly for his purposes, in organizations. And the key insight, the key claim that he fleshes out in all sorts of different ways here is on page 167, where he says, love begets love. It's a generative thing. And on 168, just going to read a short passage here. He says, quote, "This logic of love, which begets a logic of gift, expresses a deep truth about humans, that their flourishing is enabled through relationships of uncalculated giving and grateful receiving. But this logic also has practical implications for organizational management. When in harmony with the logics of exchange and duty, the logic of gift enables greater creativity, freedom, and responsibility, inspiring trust and promoting commitment, as no other incentive systems can do. So there's this idea that love is this socially generative thing, that organizations that are somehow able to give expression to that are going to be organizations that flourish in sort of unique ways, and that individuals who are able to also sort of authentically think through the right hierarchy of loves, and this is also a theme with Augustine and Manolo, sort of the right ordering of loves, and it's this question of harmony he alludes to, how to put this all in harmony, are themselves going to be more fulfilled and also going to have an energy and a dynamism to their activities. So the chapter also has some interesting engagement with the topic of the theological as sort of the basis for ultimately ordering loves in our life, as well as this basis for gratitude, this sort of pervasive gratitude that he thinks should characterize human existence. The other interesting thing about this chapter, and it's been alluded to already, is that Manolo is constantly wrestling with the, you might think, the ideal student and the potential skeptic, particularly this charge of idealism. Is this realistic? Is this just a sort of utopian pie in the sky? Wouldn't it be nice? What are the practical implications of this? What does this do for us? What does this actually mean? And I think the answer to that question, I think there is a kind of compelling answer to that. But the proof is sort of in the pudding. The proof, as it were, of the insights of this chapter, of sort of the truth about love, about its generative qualities. The evidence for that, is all over the place, but particularly it's sort of in Manolo's life and how he conducted it. It was this unbelievably generative thing. Love begat love. He was a dynamo, always networking, coming up with ideas for meaningful collaboration, always helping people, always giving. And it was so fruitful, evidenced, I think in part by the presence of all of us in this room today. So, I think we should be grateful to Manolo for, as Michael said, sort of giving us the language to talk about these things, which are so vitally important, and yet which are unfortunately unintelligible within many of the dominant frameworks that we use in academia, because it really is revealing some deep truth, and it's a deep truth that Manolo lived, and that we were all were able to benefit from. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Okay, so it's my turn. Thank you very much, Danilo, and your wonderful Abigail Adams Institute team, Mara and Matt, thank you so much. Also, Luis, thank you for supporting us, and of course, Tyler and the Humanistic Person program. Well, when I was preparing these words, I was thinking, and I was absolutely right, but what I'm going to add to what these incredible panelists are going to say. So, and at the same time, I was thinking how hard it is for me to talk about the book without talking about my experience and my learnings working with the author. So here I will share my thoughts about some of the motivations that I think are behind the book. Let's start with a brief chronology. On March 12, 2020, Manuel landed in Boston. One day later, the US began the lockdown to prevent the spread of COVID and implemented its travel ban on non-US citizens traveling from Europe. Some days later, the closing of the university became official, and faced with the impossibility of carrying out any activity at the university and at Harvard and at the RCC. As always, Manolo considered the situation providential. It was a word. Providential. And he saw the great opportunity to be able to dedicate the next 6 months to writing the book. And so he did. He got down to work, and I can tell you that it was 6 months of intense work for him, but also for many other people. As he wrote parts of the book, he gave it to read to those people he knew, and he could ask for their opinion, their advice, and above all, suggestions for improvements and points of view to make sure that anyone could be reflected in the map, whatever their way of thinking, their environment, profession, culture, age, etc. So it was, I thought, and I think, it was an act of true humility, being truly open to consider all suggestions and points of view, always with a deep appreciation, aware that they were contributions that could only improve the content. So to give you an idea, if you have had the opportunity to read the acknowledgements of the book, in the book, you will see that it may be one of the longest in the history of literature. 62 people with first and last names, in addition to former students, anonymous reviewers, his American family, residents of Elbrook and Chestnut Hill, and his Valencian family, residents of the Altet and Alameda, nieces and nephews. I remember him saying to me, Rita, what do you think? Do you think there is anyone else I should thank that I might have forgotten about? So I think it was true gratitude and not just for being polite. He took his book, he took his work on the book very seriously, being aware that having those 6 months was an opportunity and a treasure that he could not fail to take advantage of. He was very aware of the transcendent dimension of the book and of the repercussion it was going to have, so much so that every time he finished some part of it, he would tell me, Rita, make sure you keep a copy of everything in case something happens to me. The first few times I didn't pay much attention to him, but around the third time he made the comment, I remember I laughingly said to him, Manuel, can you please stop saying these things to me? And he never mentioned it again. But the day he finished the book and sent it to the publisher, he said to me, you know what? I think that after this, I can die. I don't know to what extent he foresaw what would happen 3 years later. But what I have no doubt about is that he considered the book to be an essential part of his mission, his personal purpose and IECO's purpose. Since he didn't consider himself indispensable, he said that by writing it, he no longer was necessary. Why? Because he had written down what he had practiced all his life, helping others to find meaning in their lives and in their work, promoting their full human development by helping them to be happy by loving what they do. As he says in the introduction, what prompted him to write it was a request. After leading a one-day seminar on human motivations in organizations for a group of corporate executives, a woman who was senior officer in that company approached him and told Manuel that she had decided to quit her job, and nobody understood why. Because if you are a woman, she said, it is quite difficult to access such positions. She continued, it was only today, during your seminar, that I finally realized why I quit and what drove me to that decision. That woman did not give him many reasons, but the last thing she said to Manuel that day was, you will help a lot of people, which was enough to give him his motivation to write the book. So he chose to present a framework in the form of a matrix or a map, as he explained motivation theories to his students with great academic and scientific depth and great practical wisdom. Throughout the semester, he taught to his first year students about 3 Ds when making any decision. And the map allows them to know first where you are, which is first D, description. What are the coordinates to interpret the map? More transcendent or less transcendent motivations, upper or lower type of routes. Where you want to go is the second D, diagnosis, a compass to indicate the direction to move on the map. And finally, how to go. It's the third D, decision, a roadmap to propose a path to grow in motivation and thus find greater meaning in work. I have witnessed the impact of his students because of his motivations at work. According to his own words, we are all driven in life and work to seek those things we consider good, the things we love. And as a professor, he loved his students one by one, because he sought to give them not just the useful and pleasant good, but also the moral and spiritual good. As an example, after giving his last class mid-October 2022, he introduced me to his first year students, telling them that I will be their teacher until the end of the semester, because he had been diagnosed with cancer. He was smiling to them, as always, and concluded, "I'm sure you will get excellent grades, and I hope to see you next year on campus." I have no words to explain the silence in the room and the reactions of his students, some of them crying softly. How can a professor have such a deep impact on his students after just 1 month and a half of starting the classes? I was shocked and very moved and touched, and truly, Manuel left behind a legacy through his capacity of loving unconditionally, always seeking the good of the other, and wanting to bring out the best in his students. If I have to choose one of the motivations that could best represent him, I would choose the transcendent motivation of giving the moral good, which is understanding and benevolence, that in Latin is benevolere, which means to look for the other's good, to believe in them more than they believe in themselves, always asking for more and helping them to give the very best they are capable of, to expect the best from them and helping them to grow a little more. Goethe once said, "If you treat an individual as he is, he will remain how he is. But if you treat him as if he were what he could be, he will become what he could be." I believe that here lies the essence of what a truly human leader must practice. Because good managers are like good gardeners. They make the right decisions to create the climate in which each plant will grow and thrive. This is why making known the map of motivations and meaningful work is a way to help students who do not have clear criteria on which to base their professional future, to help young professionals who are overwhelmed, who suffer from stress at work, who experience tension between work and personal life, or who do not even find meaning in their work. And it is also especially useful for people in the midst of a mid-career crisis, because it allows us to reflect on how to achieve a better work-life balance. So thank you, Manuel, for such a great legacy, a legacy that we hope to continue spreading, inspired by your eternal smile, to transform people's lives through more meaningful work, contributing to build humanistic cultures in organization and the development of society.